Now that we have studied waterfalls, floodplains and meanders in theory, it's time to go on a virtual field trip to a magical little location in County Antrim to see what these look like in the real landscape. And the place that we're going to visit is a little area called Glenoe in the southeast corner of County Antrim, not too far away from Larne. And what we have here is a river coming down here, coming through the little village of Glenoe, and another river here, the Dunisland River, meeting up to form the Glyn River as they come down here. And this is a really great little location for us to come in and explore some of these features. Now, before we jump into the GIS map in more detail, let's take a look at the Ordnance Survey Map of this area. I wonder how well you are able to read the shape of the landscape from the Ordnance Survey Map. These are great little maps because they show you so much information, but sometimes all of that information can make them a little bit cluttered. What you've got to try to do in your mind's eye now is get rid of almost everything apart from these little brown lines which represent the contour lines. These are showing the height, 100, 150, 200. They show the height of the land, but they also show the shape of the land and the steepness of the land. The closer they are together, the steeper. So I wonder, can you see the pattern of steep contour lines there? Far apart, so a gentle slope there. Steep there, again up to the top of the hill. So I wonder, what does that landscape actually look like in terms of its shape or topography to you? Well, we can make that job a little bit easier by producing a sketch map of it. I'm going to simplify this down to those were the areas with the contour lines closer together, steep slopes. Those were the areas where they're far apart, the valley bottom, and then the tops of the mountain or hills. Let's have a look again. I'll just toggle between them. Now I want you to watch this slope here. As I toggle between it, that's the steep area, flat, steep, top of hill. Flat, steep, top of hill. Watch. Flat, steep, top of hill. Let's go over to this side now. Do the same kind of thing. There's the contour lines closer together. Flat, steep, top of hill. Flat, steep, top of hill. Let's see if we can do the same. There you go. Flat, steep, top of hill. So this is a simplified map showing that area. So we've got the Glenoe River coming down here, the Dunisland River coming down here, the confluence of the two of them joining together, going into the Glyn River. So we can start to annotate this to see some of the features beginning to appear. There's our Glenoe water, there's our Dunisland water meeting together, and coming off the edge of the higher ground into the floodplain, the flat land next to the water that experiences flooding. Because the slopes are so steep here, you've got a couple of waterfalls. These slopes are so steep they're actually called escarpments, cutting down through the rock. We'll explore why in a moment. So you've got waterfall here, you've got the floodplain here, and you've got some lovely examples of meanders here in this landscape. So now that we've looked at the contour lines, we know here where the forest is, there's a steep slope. We know there's a slope up here and the flat ground in between. But let's use the power of this GIS really to travel into this landscape. So we come back here and we're beginning to see exactly that landscape, that topography that we noticed there in the Ordnance Survey Map. So let me just draw a few lines across this landscape. Comes along down the bottom of the valley where it's flat again in the floodplain, and it comes up the other side to the hill. And we can do another one of those down along flat along the floodplain up, and you're beginning to see, I hope, here how this floodplain has cut down into the surrounding landscape. Beginning to see the shape of that, and that's exactly the shape that was drawn in those contour lines that we took a look at. I can also use the GIS here to do some measurements of this. So I've come over to this to our Analyze tool. I can drag this out here and you can see the drop in the height. See that number there, 70, going down here to the middle of the river, to where the river is, dropping down into the floodplain and then coming up the other side. Look at the number getting smaller as we come up the side of that slope back up to the height that we started off at. We can do the same down here with this. You can see the slope going down. You see that number getting bigger and bigger and bigger down into the valley bottom there, the wide floodplain. Coming up the other side, notice the numbers getting smaller and smaller and smaller as we come up to the height of where we've started there. So hopefully that's beginning to give you a sense of the shape of this area that we're exploring. If we come back into our sketch map here, there it is, the height of the land going down the steep slope across and back up. And if we compare that with our contour lines of the patterns that we saw before, you'll see if I bring you back into the Ordnance Survey Map, there's the higher ground, the steep slope, the flatter valley, and back up again. So I'm hoping you're beginning to see here how you can read the shape of this landscape from what we're seeing in the contour lines. Now, from this two-dimensional sketch map, we could also do something like this, a more three-dimensional sketch map. There is the escarpment side of the valley. There's the wide floodplain, the river meandering down. There's the Glenoe River, the Dunisland River. There's the confluence, and up the other side. So we can do a sketch map like this to give us the sense of what has happened here. So let's step back from all of this and try and get our bearings. What seems to be the case is that we have got this area of higher ground here, and lots of higher ground there as well. No, surprise, surprise. County Antrim is an upland area in many large parts of it. So you've got this higher ground, but what seems to have happened here is that this river valley especially has eroded vertically down into the surrounding landscape. You can very much see that eroding vertically down, but also it's eroding laterally as the meandering river weaves across the floodplain, widening out the floodplain over time. So you're getting both vertical and lateral erosion here. And as this other river comes across from the hill here, we're getting this sudden drop down and change in height, which is producing the waterfall. Now, one of the things that we're about to discover is that there's a particular reason why there is such a dramatic change of height here to produce the waterfall, because not every river that flows from a hill flows down in a waterfall into the next river. So there is something at work here that has produced this waterfall and this valley here, and the answer is all to do with the geology. Now, to understand this better, we need to take a look at the geology of this particular area here, and it's going to reveal some of these important patterns to us. Now, this black line that's on the map here represents an ancient fault line that was created in County Antrim whenever County Antrim was splitting apart, and all of those tectonic processes were splitting Ireland and the British Isles away from North America, and all of those massive forces put a lot of pressure on the rock, and it caused this fault line to appear here. But one of the things about the fault line is that it is much more susceptible, it's much more likely to experience erosion. So what has happened here is this is an area of weakness. This line here is the area of weakness, and therefore whenever the river was eroding down, it was finding it easier to erode down vertically in this line of weakness. It was a vulnerability here, and once it had started to erode and then meander, it was also then able to erode laterally as well. So what you're seeing here is because of this fault line, this river was able to erode down more quickly and more dramatically than perhaps you can see any other valleys around about there. This is a noticeably deeper valley than many of the others, which then brings us to something very interesting happening over here. Because here you've got the Glenoe water coming along, and then the sudden drop down for the waterfall, and then coming in here to join the rest of the river. So what is happening here that's creating that interesting process? Well, let's go and have more of an explorer, shall we? So if we zoom on down here towards Glenoe, you can see the valley coming here. And again, this is flat. This valley here is a little bit deeper. It is noticeably deeper than the rest. So it's flat, reasonably flat, and then boom, then all of a sudden it comes down so steeply there. The answer lies in the geology. Let's spin around here and turn the geology layer on. Now, there is a very, very interesting pattern beginning to emerge. You have got the pink layer here, a green layer, and into an orange and blue layer. Now, what are those different rocks? Well, the pink rocks here represent the layer of basalt that was laid down around about 60 million years ago, whenever Ireland and the British Isles were at the plate boundary splitting apart. So these layer upon layer of lava spewed out, creating this covering on top of the rocks that were there before. What the green layer represents is limestone, formed whenever Ireland was at the bottom of a tropical ocean. Maybe around about 100 million years ago, when the shells and skeletons of tiny little sea creatures just were deposited down on the bottom of the ocean, built up and up and up and up, and experienced compression and cementation to turn them into that limestone. And as we'll discover, that's exactly where the Glenoe River cuts down into. Come down even further again, and the orange layer and the blue layer are two different types of mudstone. So this again is a sedimentary rock laid down before the limestone. So what you're doing really is cutting down into layers of time. So if you imagine a slicing down through the landscape here, this is what actually the river rolling down is allowed us to do. It's cutting down through the landscape, slicing down like through a cake, and revealing what lies underneath the surface, or the icing on top. The icing on top is the basalt, but if you cut down in underneath it, you've got a layer of limestone. If you cut in down underneath that again, you've got a layer of mudstone. So because of the fault coming through here, this river was able easily to cut down through these layers much more easily than elsewhere, revealing what lies beneath. Now, what happens then whenever the water runs over the top of something like this? If you've got this water coming along at the Glenoe River like you do, here comes the water, and it's falling down over the edge of that, and you're getting your waterfall. Now, of course, you now have basalt overlying limestone. Basalt, being an igneous rock, is much, much harder than your limestone, which is a sedimentary rock. And what then happens is that you start to get your notch cut out behind, like so. And of course, the material above the notch is unsupported. So eventually that will collapse down, and the waterfall would retreat back, and another notch gets created, and over and over and over again. So this is your classic conditions for the formation of your waterfall, which retreats upstream to leave behind a gorge. It is this basalt overlying the softer rock at this steep slope, and the reason why you've got the steep slope is because of the fault that's been running down through this valley, which has allowed the vertical erosion to take place more easily and more readily here. So we zoom out again and get a view from above of what that's like. We're back to similar situation that we looked at with the Ordnance Survey Map. The higher ground, the steep slope where the waterfall is, the flatter ground coming back up again to the higher ground. There is your basalt. There's your basalt. That's your icing on top. There's your fault, and this is where the river has been able to cut down in, revealing those patterns. So if we come right back to where we started, the question I asked you was, can you see the shape of the land and this landscape? And I'm hoping you can now. There is the Dunisland River, the fault running through there. There's your steeper slope with the contour lines closer together. The higher ground made here of your basalt cutting down through your limestone and your mudstone, and then weaving side to side to create that lovely floodplain. It's very flat in comparison to elsewhere because of all the deposition that's occurring, and then some of these lovely meanders that are forming here, particularly at this location. So, enough of looking at maps. It's time for us now to jump in the car and actually go and visit some of these places. So let's head out and have a bit of geographical fun. So just driving here along the upper land, the river's just flowing to my right here, and we're driving over what is part of the basalt that was laid down here about 60 million years ago, whenever Ireland was starting to split away from the United States of America and the Atlantic Ocean was being formed. So you can see that this is a relatively flat area here, although it has been eroded down by rivers, so you can maybe sense a little bit that I'm going downhill because I'm driving right along beside the river at the moment. But what you should see quite soon whenever I come down here is just how dramatic the drop is as I get close to the waterfall. Because what I'm doing is driving towards, in the far off distance, a much deeper river valley that has been carved out pardon me, because there's a fault that runs through there, and because there's a fault, it's much more easily eroded, and that has allowed then the river, which I'm following along to my right at the moment, to cut down through the basalt into the rock that was laid down below it beforehand, and that of course is your sedimentary rock. So in this case there's a little bit of limestone, and below that again is a little bit of mudstone. Now those sedimentary rocks are much more easily eroded than the basalt up above, and you will see in a moment just how dramatic the drop down is into this valley. Here we go, we're definitely going downhill, you can definitely see it, but if you think this is a hill, you haven't seen anything yet, because we're coming very close to the village of Glenoe. I'm just going to drive over a little bridge here. The bridge is taking us over the river, and I can't obviously drive over the top of the waterfall, but I can drive you down the road that runs beside the waterfall. Unsuitable for large vehicles. So you're just going to get a sense of how much of a drop down we get in this bit of the road. Here we go, hold on tight. I hope you're well strapped in, because downhill we go. Right, straight ahead is the waterfall, just in behind that. And down we go, this really steep little road. And this is the drop that the waterfall is taking as we come into this main valley, and you're just about to see it as we turn around here, that's been carved out by the other river that runs through the fault. But look, we're going down the hill again. It's a beautiful little village, this Glenoe, absolutely beautiful. And there we are, we're down at the bottom. Now, that slope, there we are, thank you. That little slope that's running down that I've just driven down is called an escarpment. It's a very steep-sided slope that's been carved out, and I'm now driving over rock that was laid down, a sedimentary rock, in this part of the river itself, in this part of the area. Now, I'm going to drive around here and do the loop for us here so that we can see the area itself. Come back up the escarpment again, because there is a little bit of loop here. I'm now driving along the floodplain. It's a flat area here. Over at my far right, I can see the other escarpments of the river floodplain here. So what I'll do is just take you on a little drive down this way. I'm just going to turn right and drive down the floodplain, or across it I should say. Here comes the car, so we're all clear, and here we go. This is us driving across the floodplain, and at the other side you can see, at the other side of the floodplain, the steeper part of the land there. But you can see here just how flat this bit is. So standing on the floodplain here of the river, just at the little bridge that you'll see on the GIS map, and here we can see the flat area with all those lovely luscious deposits that have gone down. Just far off in the background there's the escarpment. Down there is the village of Glenoe, so you can see that escarpment running all the way along the edge, and around the other side here you've got an escarpment running as well, maybe not so steep at that point, but you can see how definitely, as I zoom back out again, the line running along, if I get there, the top just there, you can imagine that landscape all has been vertically eroded down. So you got your vertical erosion here as the river has weaved from side to side, and then it pushes back against that slope, and it pushes back against that slope. That's a pretty cool cloud in the sky right there at the moment. And here's your river. Here's the river Meandering, and if we take a wee look in at this bend, we can see exactly the kind of things that we would expect on the side of the right hand side of the bend from where I'm looking. You can see the deposits that have gone down there, and on the left hand side of the bend you can see that it's much steeper, and in towards the bottom of the bank where the water is hitting it, you can see just a little bit of a notch has been cut out. So on the left hand side you've got your river cliff, on the right hand side you've got your slip off slope, exactly what you would expect to see. So this is a classic river meander in the middle of the floodplain, and up there of course is Glenoe Waterfall. So I'm now driving along the area of limestone and down actually into the mudstone here, and there is a fault, an ancient fault that was created here whenever you had all these massive amounts of tectonic movement occurring in the British Isles whenever the Atlantic Ocean was opening up. This massive big fault ripped through this area, and it has made this area more susceptible to erosion than the other area, and therefore it's that wee bit further down. So I'm just going to drive down here a little bit. Actually, I've never been down this road before. Let's see where this road takes us. Kind of hoping that it might bring us to the river itself. There's a little car, so we'll just let this car past. And there is the bridge. So we're going. Okay, there's the cool cloud still there. So we've just come from that part of the river, come down, I don't know, what, 400 or 500 meters or so to the next bridge, and you can see just how much the river has changed here. Actually, it's actually very noticeably wider even in that short distance that we've come down. But the reason why I want to show the video here is because I think this is a really good example of the lateral erosion that the meanders do as they weave across the floodplain. You can see at this side that it's very, very flat, just like the rest of the floodplain that we've been looking at. But there is a slope, quite a steep slope, just running around the left-hand bank as we're looking at it. So the meander has looped around this direction, round here, and is going, there's the river heading down just there. So you've got that curve there, and as it curves out, you've got the erosion at the outside of the bend, and it erodes and erodes and erodes, and you can see here how that would be eroding back, pushing back the cliff, the lateral erosion widening out the floodplain. So this river here is literally at the meander there is eroding back, widening out the floodplain in its current position. And this is some of the former floodplain that has been left behind. Since then, at times of flooding, of course, the water would have come up over the banks and over the top of this area and deposited the alluvium on it. That's why that is particularly flat at that place, because it's a result of the deposition. There you have a really nice example there of that lateral erosion pushing and eroding back into that bank, and then the deposition formed here on the inside bend of this meander loop. Over the river, it's the river, so we're right at the heart of the floodplain. Okay, so that's the river that's eroded down through the place where you've got the fault line, and ahead of me here you can see the escarpment, and good, that road has worked out just perfectly, and this should bring us back round again, and we should be able to drive up the other side of the escarpment. So here we go again, still driving on the floodplain here. You can see this flat area, and you can see as we're driving along, coming back here towards the beautiful little village of Glenoe. This time here I'm going to turn right, and we're going to drive up just outside the village, and we're going to drive, you'll see the escarpments, and we'll see if we can drive in and have a wee look at the waterfall itself. And here we go, back up here, and you will see a wee brown sign on the left as we're coming up here, waterfall. And there's the escarpment sitting in front of us, that very, very steep slope. You can begin to feel the rise as we come towards it, and then you'll see just how steep the road here gets again as we come up towards the waterfall itself. So we're coming up the side of the escarpment, and we're coming up at an angle because the road would be too steep to come up the escarpment straight. This is coming up at an angle. You see the escarpment there, and this will bring us into the waterfall. So let's go and have a look. So there's Glenoe village just over there where we drove down through. And there is the river itself. Now, one of the things that I said to you is that if a waterfall retreats upstream, it leaves behind a steep sided gorge. I know you can very much see that, the steep sides coming down there and the steep sides coming down there, but you can just about see poking in the corner is Glenoe Waterfall. So let's go and have a little bit of a closer look. Beautiful. You get wee mini tributaries feeding in like this. So there's the gorge all around me as that waterfall is retreated back upstream. And then again here we have our limestone rock all covered in moss here, but you can see very much that this is not your basalt at all that is very dominant in County Antrim. This is limestone, and there is the waterfall having cut down. Now you can see the rough water here, which tells us that it's a little bit shallower here. You can see that it's much more gentle there. Now what's that tell us about the depth? Yeah, deeper there, that's the plunge pool. You can't see it, it's under the water, but you can see evidence of it. Up the top there is the cap rock, and you can see the waterfall having fallen down from above it.